Hi, good evening. I hope I'm audible to all of you. I'm just going to be connecting my device to the other device to the YouTube studio. Just 1 minute. Yeah. Hi, good evening once again. Sorry, I just had finished off something. Just give me 1 minute. Is the sound bad? Let me just check. Hold on. Okay, now is the mic clear? Yeah, I think now the mic is clear. I can hear it on the other. Uh, okay, so today is the third session of this bootcamp, and we are going to be starting off with the third session. So in today's session, I will be talking about how to deal with the functions, etc. So what was the last topic we had discussed in the session? Yes. What was the last topic we had discussed in the session, everyone? Uh, I am not. Is my screen visible to all of you? Okay, I think the screen is not visible. Yeah. Okay. Now the screen is visible. Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you. Uh, Perfect. Yes. So I think we had spoken about the table format. Perfect. So we're going to continue from there, and we're going to start working with some really important functions, and then we'll move into working with some advanced concepts. So if I'm not wrong, AV Chandrakant, these videos are available on the official YouTube channel of Let's Upgrade on, on their YouTube channel. So I think their thing should be easy for you to access. I'm not really very sure if there's any other platform that they've uploaded it on, but I think you will have to check with the backend team. Anam ma'am and team will be able to help you on that front. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. So I think this was what we had done yesterday, and we are now going to move into. We've completed the basic AutoSum functions. We're now going to talk about sorting and filtering. So let's understand how to work with the basics of sorting and filtering and what is sorting and filtering actually used for. So sorting and filtering is basically used in a situation whenever we have a lot of data and we want to set up the data for analysis, or we want to filter the data based on a particular criteria or multiple set of criteria. So let's try and understand first, how do we start sorting and filtering. So the data set that I'm dealing with currently contains about 19 columns of data. You can see at the bottom here I've selected the first row, and at the bottom here you can see I have got 19 columns of data that I'm currently dealing with. So since I've selected the first row, you can see at the bottom here I have 19 numbers that are being shown, or count here is 19, which means that I've got 19 columns of data that I'm dealing with. Also, the next thing is how many rows of data am I dealing with in this particular data set. So in this data set, I'm dealing with about 24,000 rows of data. So you can see here, if I use control and down arrow key, you can see here I'm working with 23,937 rows to be precise. Now, giving you an update on the data, this data is a dummy data set for a company that sells bicycles. In India, we call it as bicycles. In the Western Hemisphere, like in the US and UK, they call it as bikes. So they are selling different products and different product categories like bikes, and then along with that, certain clothing products and certain accessories as well, right? Okay. Now, here I have got multiple kinds of fields like date, month, year, customer ID, customer age, age group, and so on and so forth. So, very quickly, first and foremost, I want you to go through this data and I want you to understand what the data is. So, this data contains multiple variables or multiple columns which are broken down into quantitative fields and qualitative fields. So, what is the meaning of a quantitative field and a qualitative field? So please understand, anything which is numerical in nature, okay, can be broken down into two types, qualitative and quantitative. So a lot of times people don't understand that everything that's a number is not quantitative. Okay. That is the basic understanding of things. So, okay, before I move ahead, I will need to take, I know we've started a little late, but I will need to take a quick break for my prayers. I will just take a quick break and come back. Anam, can you just take it over 1 minute? Just 1 minute. Okay, well, I'm back. Yeah, uh, I hope I'm audible to all of you. Okay, well, back. Okay. So sorry for that brief interruption. I had actually gone to quickly offer my prayers and then come back. Anyways, so today's session we're going to start off, as I mentioned, with sorting and filtering. I did talk about, just before I took that short break, about the types of data that we normally deal with. So we normally deal with qualitative and quantitative data. Now, as data people or data analysts, it's important for us to understand that you need to work with data and first understand the kind of data that you're working with. So, as I mentioned, you typically have quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative data is data which is numerical in nature and can be aggregated. For example, revenue, profit, etc. Age, for that matter. Age, even if it cannot be totaled, you can take an average of it. On the other hand, if you talk about the qualitative data, qualitative data is anything that is non-numeric. By default, it is qualitative in nature. But if there are certain numeric fields which are used for just identification purpose, for example, row ID, roll number, Aadhaar card number, all these are your qualitative data. So we have two types of data. One is qualitative data and one is quantitative data, right? So quantitative data by default is numeric and can be aggregated. On the other hand, qualitative data is obviously everything that is non-numeric is qualitative in nature, and anything which is numeric and cannot be aggregated is qualitative in nature. Okay, for example, row ID, then your roll number, etc. All these are numeric and cannot be aggregated. Now, the important part here is understanding how to deal with this data, especially when it comes to sorting and filtering. So here I've got some date related data. When I click the drop down for date, okay, so basically first and foremost, how do we come to the drop down? How do we actually work with these drop downs? So if you're completely a beginner with Excel, you need to know how you actually activate the sort and filter button. So for the sort and filter, you can click on the drop down for this sort and filter, and you have the option where you can click on the filter button. So when I click on the filter button, I am going to be able to activate or I am going to be able to deactivate. Either of these things can be done from the filter button. Okay. So here I have got this drop down for the date, for the month, year, etc. So if I click the drop down for the date, you can see I have the oldest to newest, newest to oldest, and I also have sorting by color, etc. So here I will simply go ahead and I will use the sort oldest to newest. When I use oldest to newest, I have the oldest, okay, that is the oldest date up here right on top. Now, please note, when it comes to sorting and filtering, there are certain important things that you have to keep in mind. First and foremost, you should note that there should be no empty rows or columns. Like if you're having a data set, okay, I should not have any empty rows. Everything should be filled. Like for example, if I've got something filled here and something filled here, and if I apply a sort and filter, it will be applied only to this section, okay, because this is a blank row. So be very careful. No empty rows and columns are allowed in this particular situation. Another thing is, when the sorting and filtering takes place, it takes place on the basis of a column, but it takes place on the entire data set. This is something that a lot of people don't know, and you have to be very careful about. Sometimes a lot of people, what they do is they select one column and then they apply the filter. That's also the wrong approach, because what will happen, that column will be filtered or sorted for you and the others will not, that column will be sorted for you, the other column will not be. But anyways, Excel is smart enough that when you select a single column, it tells you that do you want to expand the selection? But then is despite that, if you make a mistake, then it is your mistake that you're making. Okay. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and start the sorting and filtering for date-based data. So on the date, under the date, when I click the drop down, I have an option which says sort by color. And then I also have filter by color option that I can use. Okay. So here, if I click sort by color and I click on, let's say, yellow, it gives me the entire data sorted based on this particular column. And if I click the drop down and I say sort by or filter by color, it will filter out all the data and leave only those records where the column color is yellow or the fill color is yellow in this column, in the first column, the date column. So here at the bottom, you can see we have 18 rows that are there or 18 records that are there in this particular situation. I'll just clear the filter. Now, similarly, you can apply date filters, which are like a very comprehensive set of filters that you can work with. Now, obviously, I have got data up to 2023. So most of the filters will not really be applicable to this data, but these are the options available. Then you have the option where you can apply like a wildcard search. That means if you enter the data here, it will automatically apply your filter to you. So let me show you something. Let me try and find out all the records or all the transactions in this data that were done on the 20th of every month across these 6 or 7 years of data. So we write 20. Now, when I write 20, obviously I will get all the dates. The reason is because 20 is anyways mentioned in every single year. So 2017 or whatever. That's why every single date is mentioned. Now to overcome that, I will click this drop down and I will change it to date. It's a very small drop down, so you have to be very careful. And then I can see that I have 20. When I click on OK, it will show me that I have about 782 records or 782 transactions that were done on the 20th of every day across these 7 years. Okay, let me just go back and clear the date. So the date filters have a lot of options. Now comes the next part, which is dealing with the month. Now for the month, I have the drop down where I can use A to Z, but when I use A to Z, it gives me April right on top. And when I use the control down arrow key, it gives me September right at the bottom. So I have April A and then September S, which is the sorting order. So obviously I don't want this particular sort order. So how do I sort it in a chronological order? Like the correct order is Jan to December. So what I need to do here is I need to sort it in a custom sorting method, right? So for the custom sorting, what I will do is I will go to the editing command group and then click on the drop down for sort and filter. Now here I will click on custom sort. So when I do click on custom sort, it opens up the sort dialog box for me. Here I have to select the month, which is already there. And then in this order, instead of A to Z, I will click the drop down and I will click on the custom list option. So when I click on custom list, I have these list of options available, which are days of the week and then months of the year. And I have some other custom lists also created, but we won't be covering custom lists right now. We'll just pick up the January, February, March, that is the months of the year, and we click on OK. And then we click OK once again. When we do that, we now have the data sorted correctly from January to December. So this way, it becomes relatively very easy for us to work with the data, which is sorted based on the months. Next is we have got the subcategory column. Now in the subcategory column, I have got a list of all the subcategories that the company sells. So obviously there is a hierarchy, that means category, then subcategory, and the product. So under the product, we've got 3 different types of products, and under these we've got different subcategories. So we've got about 11 or 12 subcategories that are there. Now the important thing here is that I am interested in only finding out those transactions that were done for subcategories that have got the word bike in them. I'm specifically looking for a particular word, bike, B-I-K-E. So what I do is under the search option or the search box, I type BIKE and I use OK. So before I do that, you can see here I've got a list of uh, okay. Here I've got a list of the good bike. Okay, I've got a list of about 5 different options that are there, which is basically 5 different subcategories available, right? And I can simply click on OK and see at the end over here, I've got 7,274 records that are there that fit this particular criteria. So I can quickly go back and click on all of them and say, I want to get all the data. Well, and the final one is the revenue column. So in the revenue column, I'm interested in filtering out only the top 10 records. So I can do that very easily by clicking on the drop down for revenue and going to the number filters. Now, I'm not explaining the sorting part because the sorting part is relatively very simple and I've already explained it before. But if you're sorting based on, text, you will get the A to Z option. When you're sorting based on numbers, you'll get the smallest to largest and largest to smallest option. Here comes the number filters, and then you have the top 10 option. So in the top 10, you can choose top 10, or if you want, you can use this spin button to increase the number of records that you want to see. So for example, if I use this spin button and I go to top 20 records and click OK, it will give you the total revenue, it will give you the total records where I have got the top 20 records. Now, obviously, you would be surprised to see that instead of 20, you have 48 records showing up here. Now, the reason it's 48 records is because we are dealing with duplicates of data, right? And when you have so many duplicates of data, you're going to have more records that are going to be there in the data. So obviously, let's just go back and clear the filter, and we are now back to the entire data. So now the next thing that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to move into something which is relatively a little bit more advanced, that is data validation. Now, data validation per se is a situation when your data is not set up correctly because of certain reasons, where you give the freedom to the person to write your or to enter the data and they do not correctly enter the data. So by default, remember, there is no data validation applied to your data. For example, here you can see the data. There's a problem with this. The order number should have been a number, but there is AS mentioned before the number. Then here I've got Diksha Fashion written here in the spelling. Then again, the same thing in a different spelling. Same way for the other customer names as well. The same thing is where I've got North and NTH, and here I've got date format written incorrectly because the date format has to be written either with a hyphen or with a slash. So you cannot afford to have these kind of mistakes. Now, because of this, the major implication is that when you go to analyze this data, you will see that this is what you get as the output. And obviously, when you get this as the output, you are not going to get the correct output that is desired to be worked with. So what we need to do is we need to fix it. Now, after you fix it with the correct values, you get the correct output, and you can also analyze your data based on the year as well. Now, the important thing here is how do we do that in the real life example that you work with? Okay. So in this case, remember, by default, as I told you, data validation is never applied to any particular cell. That means if I select any cell, I can enter whatever I want and it will accept it, right? But when you want to ensure that you get clean data, you have to validate your data before it is entered into the cell. So the first thing I'll do is I will delete this validation rules that I have here. So when I click the cells, when I select the cells, I'll delete everything. And under the data tab, I have got this data validation command that I will click on. And it says, do you want to erase the current settings? I will say continue, and I will allow any value to be entered. So this is like the default setting. So I will allow any value to be entered in my data, and then I will click OK. Now, if I enter anything into any cells, it's going to accept it, and there's going to be no restriction for it. Okay, let's just delete all this and let's go and start from scratch. Now remember, before you do anything in terms of the validation with your cells, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to convert your data into a table format. See, this is something which is not like 100% for sure thing to do, but it is a very good thing if you do it. The reason is because if you do this, you will save yourself a lot of time so that you don't have to do it for all your rows that come in. So all the subsequent rows that come in, or all the rows of data that come in later on subsequently, they will have the rules already applied to them. Okay, so let's begin with this. Now here I have got this order number, and for the order number, what I am going to do is I'm going to apply a formatting, which is going to be, or I mean, I'm going to apply a data validation rule, wherein I will only be allowed to enter between 1001 to 9999, right? So for that, again, I select the cell, I go to the drop down for data validation, and here under any value, I change it to a whole number. And for the minimum, I will set it as 1001, and for the maximum, I will set it as 9999 and click OK. So when we do this, if I try to enter a value which is less than, let's say I'm entering 100, you see it will throw up a error for me. Now I am going to enter a correct value and it will accept it for me. Similarly, I will do it for the customer, but this time for the customer, I'll do it with a drop down. So for the drop down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the drop down with the source data as this particular source data. Now, before I move ahead, let me tell you that this data that you see here is actually data which is in a range format. And this data here is in a table format. So please note the difference between the two, because there is going to be a different implication of having a table and a range format. You'll understand it when I explain it to you with the example. So let's begin with the customer dropdown. Okay. So I go to the data validation option, and under the data validation, instead of allow any value, I'm going to select a list. And from the list, for the list, I'm going to provide it with a source of data. So the source of data is going to be this region. Sorry, it's going to be the customer. So let's select the customer's data and let's click OK. Now, when you do click OK, there is a drop down available which can be accessed by this particular key. Now, remember, even if you're entering the data manually, you cannot enter a wrong spelling. It will throw up an error. So you can simply type in DIK and you will see Diksha Fashion and hit enter. It will accept it for you. Now comes the addition of new data. So let's say when you have new data coming in, how do you handle the new data? So let's say I'm trying to put in these 3 new customers into my customer list. So I've copied and pasted it. Now, before I move ahead, I want a quick response from you. Since I've pasted it into this data, will these 3 customers appear in the drop down or no? Can you tell me? Will these 3 customers appear in the drop down or no? Very quickly. No. Very good, Manish. They will not appear in the drop down, right? So why will they not appear in the drop down? Because I have not selected these, right? When I click the drop down, they're not going to appear. So I will select this. I will go back to my data validation and I will change the source to select it with all these cells and click OK. So now I have the newly added customers appearing and I can select them as well. Now we move to the region drop down. So remember, you said that we cannot, we'll have to update the list. Okay, keep this in mind. All those who said no, Sanu KS, Om Bhatia, KSB Vlogs, Telugu, Papala, Vidhi, Sanu, and then KSB Vlogs, you all said that it will not be added, right? Now we come to the region list that needs to be created. So look at this. I go back to my data validation and here I will click on the drop down and click on list and I will select the source as these 4 regions and click OK. Now when I do click OK, I have a drop down that says north, south, east, west, and I realize, okay, there are some more regions that have been recently added and I want to add them to my list. So I select them and I paste them here. Now, when I do paste them, tell me whether these three new regions will be seen in the drop down or no. No. Okay, perfect. So all of you are saying no, it won't be seen. Okay. Sanu says it will be seen. Sanu, why do you think it's going to be seen? Shama Shai, I think that is a question for the backend team. I think you should reach out to them, please. They will help you with how you can get the certificate. Let's focus on the learning for now. Maybe the certificate can follow along later on. Absolutely bang on target, Sanu. That's right. Because I've used the table format. In fact, before I started the data validation for the list, I gave you a hint. And I was assuming that all of you would have understood. That's absolutely right, Sanu. That we are using a table format, and that is precisely why when I add the new regions, they will be available as the drop down for you, right? So that is how you work with the region setting or the region with the three new regions that are there. Now let's talk about the next one, that is date and price. So for price, we can use a decimal data type that is between 300 to 1000. It's very similar to whole number. I won't take it into discussion because we can save a little bit of time so that we can use it for something else. Okay, next is the date data validation. Now, please note for the date data validation, our requirement is that we should have anything between 1/1/2025 up to today. Now, when I say today, I don't mean the current date, that is 22 to 2025. That means I should be able to enter 23 to 2025 if I open the same file tomorrow, and so on and so forth. Now, for that to actually happen, I will need to use a function called as today, and the today function is going to give me the system date. Sorry, system date. So this will give you the current system date, not just the system date, it will give you the current system date. Okay. So what we are going to do here is we are going to go ahead and put in the current system date in the validation. So I've already written today, I've written equal to, and then you can write today. Please note that today is a function that does not take up any arguments, unlike any other function where you have to provide an input. It is a straightforward function. Today, open and close the bracket, it will work. Okay. Yes, Divesh Rana, I'm using Office 365, which is the business edition. Vidhi Dilan, so sir, it will be seen after copy and paste in drop down. So Vidhi, I mentioned that we are able to see the region. The reason we are able to see the region is because our region data is formatted as a table, whereas the customer data was formatted as a range. I told you this right in the beginning itself, right? Vidhi, I hope your query is clear now. Okay, so we have today, we open and close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I get the current date, that is 22nd of February 2025. Now again, I'm repeating this. This is a current system date that we are looking at. Okay, so I will use this formula inside my data validation rule that I'm setting. Okay, so I'll start off with data validation, and instead of any value, I will change it to a date data validation. Now for the start date, I will put in 1-1-2025. Please note this is a date, and I don't, so that's why I don't put it in double quotes or anything. I just put it as a date. Now comes the end date. So for the end date, I will write equal to, and today, open and close the bracket. Now at this point, please note that you have to write the today function correctly. That means the syntax of the function. So I'm using the word syntax. The syntax of the function is basically how you write the function, or you can even call it as the grammar of your function. So the syntax of your function is very, very important, and you have to appropriately set it up. So you have to write the grammar properly, or you have to write the function correctly. So you write equal to today, open and close the bracket. Now, once you open and close the bracket, you can just select OK. And when you do select OK, you have the date. Now you can try and enter tomorrow's date, 23 to 2025. Hit enter and you will get this error because you're trying to enter tomorrow's date. Let's try and enter today's date. Now, let me give you a shortcut, a quick trick here. So if I use control plus the colon, it will enter the current date for me inside the date cell. So if I use control colon, it enters current date, and when I hit enter, it will accept the date for me, right? So these are the data validation settings that we can actually do in Excel, right? Now moving into a very interesting and one of my favorite topics, that is conditional formatting. So, conditional formatting is used in situations when you are trying to identify certain patterns or certain insights in your data. Let's say, for example, I've given you a data set which says the salesperson and their sales that they have acquired across 6 months, right? So, these are the 6 month sales that they have done. Now, here you have been asked by the boss to quickly identify how was the month of May when you look at the data. So there are some benchmarks that have been set. The benchmark is very simple, that we have $7,000, which means that it is good and it will be deserving a reward. And anything which is below $5,000 is not a very good level, and that is going to demand, or that is going to be kind of, there will be some penalty or some sort of warning given to that salesperson. Now, how do we fit this logic into our data? So what we do is we select all the cells that contain the numbers, and we have to conditionally format our data. What do you mean by conditionally format? It means that based on some condition, I want some color or some font color to be applied to the font and the cell color within the data. So what we are going to do here is we are going to go ahead and click on the home tab, and under the home tab, we've got conditional formatting. Under conditional formatting, I have the option called as highlight cell rules greater than. So here I will set the greater than, and here it has automatically picked up some value. We'll just do one thing. We'll scroll to the right and we will select this particular cell. Now, once you've decided what is going to be the standard or the level that you want to set it to, you have to choose the formatting as well. So obviously, because this is a good level, I will choose some predefined format called as green filled with dark green text. So you can click on this and click OK. Then you can scroll to the left and you can see all the cells that have got beyond 7,000 are all colored in green. Now, this is a dynamic uh, rule that we have set. I'll explain what that means when I finish explaining the second rule. So keeping this data selected, I will establish one more rule or create one more rule, which is going to be the less than rule. So here I will say less than, and I will scroll to the right and pick up 5,000. And here already light red fill with dark red text has been selected. I will leave that as it is, and I will click on OK to get my data. Now, once you've done that, you can see that the data is now filled with red and green. So if you see here, Altman Zoe, if I reduce the data to 4,500, it will change to red. And if I increase it to 8,500, it will change to green. And if I make it 5,500, it will remain white. Okay, so let me just undo it and retain back to what it was. So this is the power of conditional formatting. Now, when you look at this particular data, what can you make out? Was the month of May a good month for the company or a bad month for the company? If you say good, why? If you say bad, why? Yes, I'm waiting for a response from all of you. Was it a good month or bad month? Bad month, right? It was a bad month because there are a lot of reds in it. That's why it was a bad month. So what I'm going to do first thing, I'm going to go back to conditional formatting drop down and I'm going to go to this clear rules section and I will clear rules from the entire sheet. So whatever rules were applied, they have now been reduced. Okay. KBS Vlogs Telugu, the question was that I colored the cells based on the values, right? So based on that, I wanted to understand whether the month for May was a good month for the company or was it a bad month for the company. That was my question. Okay. So obviously it was a bad month because there were too many reds in the data, and that is why we thought that, I mean, that is why we could make out that it was not a very good month for the company, right? Well, the next thing is dealing with the entire data. Now, my next question, listen to it very carefully. My next question is to find out that I want to see which was the best month for the company and which was the worst month for the company. Okay. So let's try and understand this. Now, in order to understand the best month and the worst month, obviously you can use the 7,000 and 5,000 rule that I just showed you, but that would not be good because there would be a lot of relative values that we are looking at. So we cannot kind of, generalize the target as 5,000 and 7,000. It would not give us a very clear picture. So let's do one thing. Let us go ahead and use another technique which is called as color scales. So how do color scales really work? Let's understand that. And what do you mean by color scales? So what the color scales rules of conditional formatting does for you is it picks up the data which is the lowest value and picks up the data which is the highest value and accordingly adjusts the colors for you based on that. Let me give you an example. So here what we can see is, let me just put my laptop for charging. Yeah. So here what you can see is, you can see you've got the data. You will just select the entire data with only the numbers selected. Once you've selected the numbers, the next thing is you're going to go to conditional formatting drop down and you're going to click on color scales. Now in the color scales, we will click on the green to red color scale. When I use this green to red color scale, you can see the data is now very easily visible with respect to the colors being, making the number stand out very clearly. So from this, what can we do? What can we understand? Which is the best month and which is the worst month? Very quickly. Can anyone tell me which was the best month and the worst month? Very good. So very quickly, you can say that October is the best and August is the worst. So all of you who are paying attention and have been following, well and good, you are very easily able to understand that October happens to be the best month and August happens to be the worst month. The fact being that October has got a lot of green and August has a lot of red. Perfect. Now comes the next step, that is dealing with quick analysis. Now for quick analysis, what we're going to do is we're going to deal with the data wherein we can quickly go and analyze the data from a macro perspective. Now, what do you mean by the word macro perspective? Macro perspective basically means that from an overview, like from a eagle's eye perspective, from a very, broad perspective, I'm able to understand what's happening in my data. So let's say, for example, here, okay, I'm going to select this data. It's the same data. I'm going to select this data and I want to understand how much is each salesperson contributing towards the total revenue. Okay. That means what is the contribution of each of the salesperson. Now, for that to actually happen or for that to be made possible, what I can do is I can first take the total of each of these salespeople and then I can divide each of the total by the grand total to understand how much percentage is each individual salesperson contributing, right? But instead of doing all that manual work and manual labor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the data, and then I'm going to use a feature called as quick analysis. So here at the bottom, you can see quick analysis. You click on it, and the quick analysis has got many options like formatting, charts, totals. So I'll select totals here. And under totals, I do have total percentage, and I also have so this is basically for vertical totals or the vertical calculation, and the yellow one is for the horizontal calculation. So that happens at the horizontal level. So here I will select percentage total. Now when I do click on percentage total, it gives you the percentage total calculation. So for example, here you can see amongst all the salespeople, Albertson Cathy is giving 9.18% of the total sales. Now, to understand this further better, what you can simply do is you can select all the cells again, and you can use the conditional formatting and click on color scales and click on this green to red again. So at one quick glance, you can see that most of them that are green, this is the darkest green, which indicates that Albertson Cathy has got the maximum sales for the company. Okay. So I hope you all are enjoying the session and you are able to understand everything. So from what I can see is there is a lot of interaction that's happening, which I am pretty glad about. And simultaneously, if you can give me a quick thumbs up in the chat or give me a quick one word feedback with respect to the boot camp so far, it would really help. Yeah. Okay. So now we move into the last and the most important part of our bootcamp, that is working with some complex functions in Excel. So I'm going to teach you two important functions, and I'm going to teach you how to work with the pivot tables towards the end. So the functions that we're going to learn is logical function. So let's look at logical functions here, and let's see how do we work with the logical functions. So here I've got some information about, again, the salespeople, and I have to find out whether we are supposed to give them an incentive or we don't give them an incentive. So what we are going to do is a very simple thing. I'm going to get the total, so I'm going to select all these cells and I will use the shortcut Alt equal to. That gives me the total for all of them. So it's a very straightforward shortcut which I taught you on day one, if I'm not wrong. And then now the next thing is I'm going to try and establish some sort of a rule which says anybody who is getting greater than 30,000, that person gets an incentive, and person who doesn't get more than 30,000 doesn't get an incentive. So for that, I will use an if function. That's a logical function rather than doing it manually. So what we do is we are going to go with respect to the incentive column, and here I'm going to write a formula which is going to be equal to if, hit the tab key. Now, since we are working with the function for the first time, which is a complex function, I can use Shift and F3 on my keyboard. Okay, I'll just write down the shortcut on the screen so that you can see. Shift plus F3 on the keyboard. This opens up this function arguments dialog box. Now, in the function arguments dialog box, what you can simply do is you can go ahead and write your function arguments. So please note that when you say function arguments, it basically means the inputs that you have to provide the function. So for the if function, you first have to provide a logical test. It means what are you actually trying to check, and based on that, if the value of that test is true, that means if it is true, you will return something, and if it is false, you will return something else. Now, obviously here you can have multiple ways of establishing the logic that you want. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to check in this column anywhere whether the value is less than $30,000, the person should not receive an incentive. Wherever it is either 30,000 or greater than 30,000, you can write yes for the incentive column. That's what we want. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and we are going to update the logical test with the cell of the Q2 and Q3 sales. So I'm going to select the cell and I'm going to put in a less than 30,000 as my setup. 30,000. And now it says value if true. So what happens if my value is less than 30,000 for the Q2 and Q3 sales? So there I would want to write no incentive. So I'm putting no incentive word or the no incentive term in double quotes. So you can see that here I have written no incentive in double quotes, and similarly I will write incentive in double quotes as well. Now, why are we putting this in double quotes? Because we are using a string as part of our formula. So whenever you write a text inside a formula, you have to put it in double quotes so that Excel understands it is a string or text that we are working with. Satendra, with respect to Java session starting, I think again you'll have to check with the backend team because I am a trainer only for this particular technology and Power BI. So I don't know when you're going to start with the Java session. So please check with the backend team; they'll help you with it. Okay. Now, when I click OK, you will notice that there is an incentive and there is no incentive. Now, you'll be wondering how come all these rows that have no incentive have been highlighted with red. So there I have used a custom conditional formatting rule that is there, which is out of the scope for today's session. So I'm not really getting into that part. Okay. Well, now moving into the next aspect of our session, that is working with the lookup functions. But before we do that, let me show you how we can further the requirement and deal with it that is there. Yeah. So here what we will do is we will try to find out how much is the incentive percentage that is applicable to the individual. So for that, what we are doing is we are going to go ahead and use this slab that is there. So the slab here says 0 to 29,999, no incentive, and so on and so forth. So what we do here is we go ahead and we establish this kind of a table because we cannot use a slab like this directly for checking. So the value that we have to use is the value that we are going to check. So what we do here is we start off with anything less than, so anything less than 30,000, then less than 40,000, then less than 50,000, and less than 60,000. This is the logic that we establish, and the incentives will be there. Now, please note that here we will be using these values for checking, and these will be the output values or the outcome values. So what I will do is whatever I use from this range of cells, I will lock these range of cells or these cells when I use it in my formula. So I will be using F4 to lock them. Well, now going back to the formula, so I'll start off here with the IFS function. You can use the old nested if method, but I'm not getting into it. You can use the IFS, which is a new function in Excel. So I can start off with equal to IFS, hit the tab key. Now in the IFS function, I'm going to check this as my value, and I will check whether it is less than, and I will pick up this particular cell here and lock it. So that means if it is less than 30,000, it should return no incentive, that is 0%. So I lock it again. So this is my first part, which says here I'm picking up if the value is less than 30,000, then it should be no incentive. Otherwise, then it should continue. So then here my next argument is going to be again checking the same thing. Sorry. My next thing is going to be again checking my Q2 and Q3 sales if it is less than 40,000 and lock it, and so on and so forth. I'll just keep going ahead with my calculation. So I'll just do this very quickly. The next thing is again I'm going to check the sales value whether it is less than 50,000, which is in the cell below it, and I will lock it and put a comma, and here I will check it with 15% and lock it again. Finally, I will check for 60,000. So again, I will go back and check whether it is less than 60,000. Lock it. It is going to be 17%. So lock it again. Then finally, one last thing, I will check it whether it is greater than, I will check my Q2 and Q3 sales, whether it is greater than or equal to 60,000, and lock this again and put a comma and select 20%. Well, now there are two things I'm going to teach you here again. When I'm using these values here, I'm locking them because I have to use these values throughout my entire column. Okay. One is that. Second thing is, when I am selecting my data or when I'm working with it, you will notice every time I am using the formula, I am using the formula for this particular cell only. I'm not moving down. So a lot of times people make a mistake. They start with the first cell and then they keep going down. So don't do that. Okay. Uh, the shortcut for locking is F4. Now I can close my bracket, and if I want, I can just increase the the formula bar height, and I can see whether everything's right. So you can see everything is now being set up correctly. All the cell references have been locked in the formula. You can hit enter, and you can see the incentive percentage being calculated for you for every individual salesperson. Now the only thing you need to do is you multiply the incentive amount, whatever the incentive amount is or the percentage is, you multiply it with the sales that the person has done, and that will give you the incentive amount calculation. Okay, so you can see that Alberts and Kathy is getting the maximum sales amount. Okay, so that is about it for logical functions. Now the last two topics for today is the VLOOKUP or the lookup functions with the pivot tables. So let me go and open up another sheet or another workbook of data called as lookup functions. So by the time we open up the lookup functions, let's quickly go ahead and try and understand what does a lookup function actually do and how does it help us in calculations. So I'm just deleting some data which is to be pulled in from another sheet. Okay, perfect. Now here I have a invoices sheet for a company that sells printers to different businesses. Okay, and this is the invoices sheet, which is like recording all the transactions for the company, whatever product is being sold to whatever customer or whichever customer you are working with, right? So we've got state and we've got type which need to be extracted. Now we also have two other tables like the customers table and the products table. Now these two tables will help us to get information that is missing from our original data. Now, before I move ahead, let's first understand the objective of this particular exercise. What we need to do is we need to go about getting the data from another table because we need to perform the revenue calculation. Now, here you can see that the rate of each of the products is missing. Until I don't get the rate, I will not get. Okay, Rao, I'm glad you enjoyed the session. Okay, perfect. So the rate, till I don't get the rate, I will not get the revenue. Until I don't get the revenue, I will not be able to calculate total revenue and the other aspects of the data. So what I will need to do here is I will need to first go ahead and bring the data from my tables of the customers and the products. So I'll start off by writing the VLOOKUP function. Now, the VLOOKUP function is basically designed to bring in data from the other table based on the first column of the lookup table. So remember, like for example, I'm trying to bring in data from the customers table. So my customer table becomes the lookup table. And I can only bring in, or I should ideally use the account number to bring the data from the table that I want. So for example, here I want state and type data. So for bringing in the state and type data, I need to use the account number. I can also use the customer name, but it would not be a good idea to use the customer name because VLOOKUP is going to work from, or it is going to be based on the first column of the data. Okay. So we start off by bringing in the lookup value. So we start off by equal to VLOOKUP. Now hit the tab key and then shift F3 to open up the function arguments dialog box. This is also called as the formula builder. It's also called as the formula builder that you can be working with. Okay. Now it's time for us to understand how to work with the lookup function. So in the VLOOKUP function, you have 4 arguments. You have lookup value, you have table array, column index number, and range lookup. So how do we implement this? Now, in order to implement this, please note, I forgot to mention this before. Whenever you see a non-bold argument or an argument which is not bold, remember that it is an optional argument. Okay. So an optional argument has a default value as well that you need to understand. So here the first is lookup value. Now the lookup value is the column, or it's the value on the basis of which you will be able to extract data from the other table. So how do you do that? You start by selecting the customer account number. Now you will notice it says @customer account. The reason it says @customer account is because my data is formatted as a table. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to pull in the table array. So for the table array basically means from which table am I going to bring in the data. So for that, I need to select the customers sheet. And on the customer sheet, I will select this data, which is going to be the data right from the top to the bottom. Okay. Now, please note, I'm just zooming in for you to understand. Here, I'm using A1 to D21. Okay. Now, at this point, when I'm using A1 to D21, I know one thing, that my formula is going to move down in a particular column. So when it moves down, A1 will become A2 and D21 will become D22. So what I need to do is I have to ensure that this doesn't happen, and it will keep changing. So what I will need to do is when I select this A1 to D21, I will lock it by using the F4 key on my keyboard. Is this clear? Is this part clear to everyone? Perfect. Well, now moving into the detail where we are going to go ahead and lock this by pressing F4. So now I will select this entire range and press F4, and then it asks me for the column index number. Now, what is the column index number all about? So if I actually go back to my customers table and I look at my table, I can see that my table over here contains 4 columns, right? Now, column index number basically indicates what column number am I trying to extract from the data. So here I have 1, I have 2, I have 3, and 4. Please note that state is in the 3rd column index number and type is in the 4th column index number. And this column index number is not going to change. It is going to remain the same throughout, whether it starts in column A or whether it starts in column Z. It doesn't make a difference. Okay. So here we go ahead and I type here number 3. Please note, you don't have to type the name or the letter or anything. You just have to type a number. It is a column index number. I'm repeating it. It's a number, not a alphabet or a column name. Okay, that's very important that you need to understand this. Then comes the range lookup. Now for the range lookup, I'm going to take you to the whiteboard to explain this concept to you. So when you talk about range lookup, there are 2 range lookup options that you can work with. So there is a default value. The default value is 1. Now, you just first need to understand that this is a default value, but what exactly is 1 and what is 0? So you have 0, which basically means false, and 1 is for true. Now, when we say false and true, what we need to understand is we need to understand what is the concept of this false and true actually in real life or in the real example that we're dealing with. So, false basically indicates that we are looking for an exact match. So, exactly what's happening is what we are looking at. And true means you're looking for an approximate match. Okay, so that's what exactly what we are planning to do. So exact match would mean, let's say for example, here I've got the customer ID and I want to find out the customer region. So 1, 2, 3. So we'll have a unique value, and this unique value will be there assigned only to one customer name. Hence, there will be only one region assigned to that particular customer ID. So that's an exact match example. Whereas in case of an approximate match, it's a different story. Like the approximate match would be when you're trying to find out the incentive calculation or you're trying to find out the grade of a student, etc. So that is when you use the approximate match. Okay. So in our case, we will be using the exact match. So how will we work it out? We will either write 0 or we will write 0 or we will write false over here. So we write 0 and we click on OK. So you can see it automatically picks up the state for you, and you can easily work with the state. KBS blogs Telugu. Can you ask me? Can you please specify what you want me to repeat? Sorry, KSB vlogs Telugu. Please specify what do you want me to repeat. Okay. In the meantime, if I want to get the type column, everything remains the same. The only thing changes is the column index number. So what do you think will be the column index number, everyone? What will be the column index number? Sankalp, it can't be 1. So I need the customer type. So my column index number is going to be 4, because here you can see the customer. I don't know what random numbers you all are writing, 1, 12 or 0. Okay, wait. I need to extract the type of the customer, right? So here you can see we have account, customer name, state, and type. Okay. I want to find out type column. So what will be the column index number in this case? Arti, it won't be 3 because 3 is already allocated to the state. I am looking for the type column index number. 4. Very good, Prasanna. That's right. You are going to be entering the column index number as 4. Okay. So here we go back to our data, and then here I write my formula again, equal to VLOOKUP, hit the tab key, then shift F3 to open up the function arguments dialog box. Now you don't have to do this every time. You can just go into your formula bar and you can keep typing your formula. That's also absolutely fine. So my lookup value is going to be the customer account number. My table array will be the entire customers table. So I can select the first cell and I can use Control Shift right and Control Shift down. This is the shortcut for selecting a large range of data. Press F4 to lock it, and the column index number here will be 4 and the range lookup will be 0. And now you can quickly enter OK. and you will get the state and the type of the customer data that we're looking at. Okay, so everyone now is giving the correct value. That's right. The column index number will be 4. So I hope you've understood the logic of dealing with the lookup function so far. Yes? Okay. Now it's time for us to handle the remaining part, which is the calculation for or getting the product line and the rate of the product. So in the products table, or in the product sheet, I've got some data related to the products that are there. And using that data, I will be getting the product line and the product unit price into my invoices sheet. And when I do that, I will be automatically calculating the rate because I already have a formula that multiplies the quantity with the rate. So what we are going to do is we are going to go to the product line sheet and the product line cell, and we will work with Pahadi Wines. When you say VLOOKUP and index match, yes, they perform the similar tasks, but index match is a little bit more powerful because it is easier to work with. It's more efficient, it's faster, and most importantly, you can perform a right to left lookup as well. Anyways, because this is a boot camp and it's like more of a starting point for people learning Excel, I'm not getting into the details of that. Anyways, now for the product line, I'm going to be working with VLOOKUP again. So this time I will work with VLOOKUP. But before I start working, please note that my products data is already formatted as a table. If I go to the table design tab, you can see here, I've got products and I am now looking at the table name. So I can use this table name directly in my formula. I want you to pay attention how that is done. So you start with an equal to sign, VLOOKUP, hit the tab key. Now, before I move ahead, also 1 minute. Looking at products, I need to extract product line and I need to extract unit price. So product line and unit price, they are both in the column index number 3 and 4 respectively. So I need to extract for product line, I need the number as 3, and here I need the number as 4. So this is what I'm actually looking out for. Okay. So I go back here and I start with equal to VLOOKUP, hit the tab key. Now my lookup value is the part number because that is the first column in my products table. Now instead of going back to the products table and selecting the table manually, I am directly going to write the name of the table. So I'll write products here, and you can see products is available in the drop down. You can select products and hit the tab key to invoke your table name. Then you put a comma, and now you have column index number. So for the column index number here, what you can write is you can write 3 because we are looking for product line, and then you put a comma, and here now in this drop down here you have true or false. So we need false because we need an exact match. Close the bracket and press enter. So we get the product line. Now very quickly, using the same method, I will calculate the rate equal to VLOOKUP, hit the tab key. Part number is my lookup value, comma. My table array is going to be the name of the table, that's products. You can see products as the available name. Hit the tab key to invoke the products table name, comma. My column index number will be 4, and then I put a comma, and again I use the false range lookup. Close my bracket and press enter. So this gives you the rate, and obviously because there's a formula in place, the revenue is also calculated. Well, now it's time to quickly get the consolidation of the data or quickly summarize this data. Now, in order to summarize the data that I have just prepared using VLOOKUP, I can use the pivot table. That's the last part of our session today. Okay. So here, because my data is already formatted as a table, I go to the table design tab, and here I can use the option summarize with pivot table, or I can go to the insert tab, and from there I can use the pivot table option as well. So let's just go to table design and click on summarize with pivot table, and here I have got a new worksheet and click on OK. So I put this data onto a new worksheet, and because I've put it onto a new worksheet, it's going to be easier to work for me. So here again, I've got the revenue. So that's the only column that is there that I will be using to analyze my data. So I will simply click on the checkbox for revenue and it will automatically go to the values area. Now, please note that the pivot table has got four important areas: filters, columns, rows, and values. Now, what do these areas actually mean and how do they work? So basically, when I click on revenue, it gets added to the values area and it automatically creates a summarization for me, right? This summarization is going to be a very simple and easy summarization that we are actually dealing with. I think I don't know why this is happening. But anyways, we've got the revenue. Now I want to break down this revenue. So as a owner of the business, I want to see what is the total revenue coming in from different states. So I can simply click on state and automatically this will be broken down by the state. I can also look at the data broken down by the product line by clicking on product line. And when I click on product line, you can see for each state that the breakdown has happened, there is a further breakdown of the different product lines. Now, this situation is because both my fields that were non-numerical have gone into the rows area. Okay. And it has broken down the data for me and it has given me the breakdown. Now, what I can do is I can drag product line into the columns area to have a simple breakdown of the data in a more columnar format. Now, from here, I can even create a quick chart or a very quick graph. I can click on insert and click on recommended charts. And here I can see a list of recommended charts. I can click on the recommended charts and click OK. And this is a chart that I get. The advantage is that as and when I make changes to my pivot table, immediately the chart will also update. For example, if I remove product line, you can see this is now giving me the sales only for the states of data that is there. Okay, so this is how you work with your pivot tables, and that's the end of my 3-day Excel bootcamp for all of you. I hope you all enjoyed the session, and if you want, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Professor Avesh Bornia. Okay, and you can connect with me, and we can you can also see a lot of other things that I normally keep sharing. But please make sure that you people have a you know post that goes for today's and the entire bootcamp about Let's Upgrade. Please do tag Let's Upgrade on LinkedIn because that really helps us keep coming up with these kind of boot camps and helping you learning and upgrading in your life. Okay, so keep up the spirit for everyone, and thank you for being a wonderful audience and being there with me throughout the session. Okay, thank you everyone. I'm glad that all of you learned a lot of tips and tricks from these sessions of mine. I hope that you implement those tips and tricks in the long run and you use it very frequently. Okay, so the objective with respect to Excel or any kind of tool is for any kind of tool is that you keep practicing. So practice is the key, and that will make you really good with it. Okay, fine. So with respect to any queries for certificates or attendance or anything, the backend team is going to help you with it. Whoever's the moderator and Anam ma'am at the backend team will help. So thank you, Let's Upgrade, for this wonderful opportunity to interact with people from around the entire country and also interacting with all of you. It was fun and it was fun teaching all of you. I hope you all had the same fun learning. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend ahead.